The Tvach. We're learning as Chosr for Shleima Filan Chaya Basarach and for Bastian Baschaya. It's actually the next room right over. Baruch Hashem, feeling pretty good. So we are on Daf Kufches Amud Aleph. We are discussing the Shita of Rav that Rav had just said. We had just said the Shita of, in the Mishnah we had said that a drop of milk that fell on basar, where the basar was sticking out of the milk. We said if there's nice and tam in that chaticha, it's also. But if you move around the pot, then if there's a nice and tam in the kedera, then it's off. Then even if it's not. But we're talking about the first part of the Mishnah, that a tipas cholov that fell on a chaticha, if it's nice and tam in that chaticha, it's asa. Rav said about that, since Rashi had said that is talking about whether the piece of meat itself becomes aser, and the Mishnah is not discussing the rest of the pot. But rather than clarify this, he says since the milk was nice and tam into that chaticha, the chaticha becomes an avela, and it's asering the entire pot, because then you have the flavor that chaticha becomes aser meat, and the meat is in the pot, and it's the same min as the meat in the pot, and like we said, it's talking about a thick type of stew, so it's min b'minai, it's all min b'minai, so that chelik, that piece of meat, asers the rest of the pot. And it doesn't make a difference how much meat there is in the rest of the pot, because min b'minai is not batal. That was what Rav had said. So now we are up to Umay Kasava, about 10 lines from the bottom. Last two words on the line. Umay Kasava. What is this shita of Rav? That he's saying that we say chaticha atzma nasas nevela, that the piece of meat that had a drop of milk fall on it, that chaticha, the whole chaticha, becomes aser, and it has its own ability to aser. So what does he hold on a very related question, which is really the other side of the coin of that thing of chaticha nas nevela? Ikasava efshel l'soichatay motor chaticha may nas nevela. What does Rav hold about this question of efshel l'soichatay? Is it possible to squeeze out the isser that was in that meat? According to Rav said that the chaticha itself becomes an avela, becomes aser on its own. But what is the din as far as if the milk that went into that meat then leaves? When you cook it together with the rest of the pot, then that tipa of milk then gets brought into the rest of the pot. Now that little bit of milk was not bottle. It was nice and tam in that single chaticha, but it's not going to be nice and tam in the whole thing. So what happens if that drop of milk goes out of when you cook it, that causes the tam isser, the tam of the milk, to go out. So it became bottle. So Zaktimar must be, if it was true that efshel soichata is mutter, that when the tam of the milk gets then dispersed amongst the rest of the stew, it's considered the milk left the original slice, the original chaticha, and that chaticha should no longer be aser. Then the chaticha, why does it become an avela? Why do we say it asers everything else? When the flavor goes out, it's no longer aser. Elakasavar efshel soichata aser. Elamai, Rav obviously holds, like we said, that's the other side. It's almost like a shorthand for the shita of chaticha nas and avela. So the way it appears to me, it's almost another way of describing chaticha nas and avela is that it's efshel l'soichatay, even if it's able to be forced out, it remains aser, and it doesn't become mutter because the tam left. and the Itmar, Rav Rav Chanina Rav Yechon, the army Efshel Soich Te Aser, Shmuel Rav Shim Bar Rebbe, Rish Lakish, the army Efshel Soich Te. So we see that we have a list of the Shitas where Rav is also saying Efshel Soich Te is Aser. Zak Gemara, but this is problematic. Is that really true? That he holds when the Isser can be squeezed out, it remains Asr. It's a Chaticha Nas, the Vela remains Asr. For Itma. Kzayis Basha, Shenafel Tech Yura Shachol. This is the opposite of the case that we've been talking about till now. We're talking about now where you had a Kazayas of, right in the Mishnah, we're talking about a drop of milk fell into a stew of meat. Over here we're talking about a pot of milk that a kazayis of basa fell into. Into a vat, a large vat of milk. And the understanding is that a vat is large enough that it would certainly be mevatel a kazayis of basa. Amarav, basar aser, the basar becomes aser, it's the kazayis. The kazayis of basar absorbed the chalav, and it becomes aser. The chalav mutter. But the chalav, the tam of the basar is not enough to aser the chalav, and it's not min b'minai, so it becomes batul. It doesn't give a tam, and it's not going to be aser. If you hold that a tam, something got a tam, and that tam was forced out of it, it still remains aser. Essentially, that chaticha nas nevela. Cholav amay mutter. Why is the vat of cholav mutter? Cholav nevelahu. The cholav that was absorbed into this kazayas, right? That cholav. It's important to remember, and this is something that took me a while to grasp while learning this. There's no such thing as basar b'cholav. What do I mean by that? When we say basar b'cholav, in our minds we picture a cheeseburger, and that's one piece of basar b'cholav. That's not what it really is. It's two separate things. The cheese got the taste of meat, and the meat got the taste of cheese. But they're each independent isurim, right? Meat that was cooked with cheese, the meat gets a tam of the cheese, and vice versa. But they each are separate. So Gemara is saying, why are we saying here that the tam of the basar that went into the meat that went into the big vat of milk is going to be mutter? Because the cholav is going to be mutter because it's too much and it's mevat. But there's some cholav that went into the kazayas of meat, and that cholav got a tam that got mixed with the meat. It got mixed into the kazayas of basar. So that cholav became cholav that has a taste of meat on it, and then it was re-expelled out of the kazayas of basar. So why doesn't that cholav have a din of min b'mina is not batul? And when it goes into the yura shel chalav, into the big vat of chalav, it should aser it als min b'mina lebatel.
We're denouncing the whole concept of batel b'shishim?
No. Well, what do you mean? How are we denouncing?
Because it's a huge vat, right?
You're saying, first of all, we're not talking about, I mean, you have to give me a case of where you can have batel b'shishim if you have just a tam of let's say you have something that just gives out a tam, but it doesn't take a tam into it. Let's say you have ham, right? A kazayas of ham that goes into your kosher soup. If it's batel, you'll be able to eat the whole thing. It's just by basar b'chalav that you have this unusual circumstance that the chalav becomes also from the meat.
All right, so let me rephrase that. With basar b'chalav, we're denouncing the whole, but there is no such thing as because this milk that comes out of the meat is very small, obviously. The amount that's coming out of the meat is tiny compared to.
Yeah, but it's because you have min b'minai. If it wasn't min b'minai, then it would be batel. So yeah, I'm not. I can't think of a case of where you'll have bittul of basar b'chalav, but I'm sure it exists. So you have to work it through to where it's not min b'minai. Zak Gemara, no, this is not a raya, but this is all. It's also La'alam Kasavar. So this is shver. How could it be if you hold? It should l'chayra, the milk should not be mutter if you hold the efshel l'seich fe'asa. So we'll have a teretz to this also. La'alam Kasavar Rav efshel l'seich fe'asa. So why is the milk mutter? Shani Hasan Damakroli Savasha Gadi B'Chalei Bima. Torah says you shouldn't cook a kid, a goat, in the chalav of its mother, the mother's milk. Gadi Ashatar V'Lei Chalav. The Mar is suggesting that maybe according to Rav, there's no isser of milk with a taste of meat. The only isser is meat with a taste of milk. It only goes one way. So the Mar immediately jumps on that, and this is clearly not a viable suggestion. Is it really true that only basa with milk in it, with a taste of milk is awesome, but not milk with a taste of meat? But itma, chatzi zay is basa, but chatzi zay is chalav. If you took a half a gazayis of basa and you cook with a chatzi zayis with a half gazayis of milk, shebishlan zemzeh, and you cook the two of them together, amarav loika al chilasav and loika al bishuli. You go malchus for eating the chatzi zayis of basa or chatzi zayis of chalav, but you don't get malchus of cooking them together. How could you be usher for eating a half a kazayis of gedi of basar, and the other half of kazayis is chalav, which is no isser on. It's only an isser of meat that has a taste of chalav, but the chalav is not usher. So how could you don't have a shear? It's only chatzi shiru. It's only chatzi shiru. It's only half a gazayis. Chalav nami asur. Must be this is rejected. Rav holds chalav is also asur. So back to our original question. So why, if you hold that efshel seichata is asur and chaticha nas nevela, why is that yura shel chalav, the vat of milk, mutter when you have a kazayis of basar? Why do we say the milk comes out of the kazayis and asur the rest of the pot? Al tzmim b'minoi. We're talking about when the basar, the kazayis of basar, fell into a boiling pot of milk. The mivla bala miflat loy palat. The rule is something that's boiling hot. It causes the milk to be absorbed into the kazayis basar, but while it's boiling, it doesn't absorb. So the kazayis of basar can only absorb, but it can't exude, it can't be pilot, it can't cause the milk to go out of it. So there's no min b'minoi of chalav that got a tama of basar going out into the yurush of chalav. In fact, the Gemara soif kinaya chadar pol. Gemara says, but in the end, nothing can boil forever. So when it's going to cool down, at that point, then the tama of the chalav l'chayra will go into the chalav with the tama basar, and it will go back into the large vat and passel it. So we're talking about where the guy took some tongues and he yanked out the kazayis before it stopped boiling, so there was never an opportunity for the chalav to go out of the kazayis into the boiling milk. Okay, so that's the teretz of why, in that case, while it's true that it could be that Rav holds, Rav could hold that efshel seichata is asur, and even so, when you have a kazayis of basar that fell into a large pot of milk, as long as the kazayis, as long as the pot was boiling, and you remove the kazayis before it came out, it's possible that efshel seichata is asur, but over here it doesn't asur the vat of milk. But in the course of responding to this, we had mentioned, we would suggest that maybe a person only comes Also, it's only also to eat the meat that got a taste of milk, but not milk that got a taste of meat. And he said that can't be because this price of chatzizayis basar and chatzizayis chalov. Rav said it's loika al chilasav and a loika al bishuli. So, fact the Gemara on that memra. Gufa. Chatzizayis basar and chatzizayis chalov shebishun zem zeh. Amarav loika al chilasav and a loika al bishula. He gets malchus for eating it, the chatzizayis for chatzizayis, but he doesn't get for cooking it. Marsha. Fact the Gemara. Starfen. And the Gemara says, this is going back a little bit on what I had stated before, that milk and meat are two separate things, and you can be chayiv for milk that has a taste of meat, and vice versa. But he's saying maybe when you get a chatzizayis of meat together with chatzizayis basar, you can look at the two of them together as one entity of basar b'chalav. So that you can combine them. They could be mitzvah of them to come up with a kazayis. Affecting Marsha. If that's the case, wasn't they chayev for cooking them together? The loy mitzvah, but if they don't combine achila nami lilki, why is he chayev for eating it? The chari doesn't have a kazayis of either basa or chalav. So how could it be chayev? As far as cooking them together, you don't say he cooked together basa or chalav. We're talking about over here where it was actually cooked together more than a kazayas of meat together with more than a kazayas of chalav. And on that's what they don't. It does, when you're not mitzvah a chatzizayis and another chatzizayis to make basa b'chalav. So when he says that you're chayiv, when he said you're not chayiv, and when you're for bishul, that's talking about was taka a half with a half. If you only cooked a half and a half, there's not going to be any bishul.
And
that what you said you're going to be
and
chayiv
likewise, you wouldn't
eating.
be chayiv on the filo.
So that what you said you're chayiv on eating. It's talking about where you did have actually a kazayis of basar and with a kazayis of chalav that you cook together. And the question is now, he takes, after they were cooked together, he took a half a kazayis of chalav together with a half a kazayis of basar that had been cooked together. So then they're mitzdarif in the sense that you could be mitzdarif. They both have a din of basar b'chalav. And if you eat them together, they were cooked together. They got the din of one kazayis of basar b'chalav yichayim. But if you were to if you originally only have cooked together a chatzizayis with a chatzizayis, a taka wouldn't be. That's not considered mitzdarif. It's not mitzdarif for that purpose. It's only mitzdarif when it was originally cooked together, and now you take a chatzizayis of basar together with a chatzizayis of chalav. Okay. Zak Gemara b'chein tani levi masisim kashem shaloika v'lasa kach loicha b'shulin.
You skipped.
Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped. The Levi Amar af like al b'shulin. Levi says you're even going to be chayiv for bishul. That means even if he holds takna mitzdarif, that if you cook a half a gazayis with a half a zayis of chalav with a half a zayis of basar, you chayiv. B'chein tani levi masisim kashem shaloika v'lasa kach loicha b'shulin. That's what Levi says on this Mishnah that we had just quoted. That he disagrees with Rav and he says Yechayiv on the Chila just like Yechayiv on the Bishul, or the other way around. Yechayiv on the Bishul just like on the Achila. So tomorrow, Be'ezeh Bishul Amru. What kind of Bishul? This is a totally unrelated point. How much of a Bishul do you have to do to be Chayiv for being a Vashal Basa B'chalav? So tomorrow, Bishul Shacher Ma'ichlid I say Machas Bishul. Where Acherim Rashi says meaning Rashi says it has to be that if you give it to someone that they was fully cooked, and if you continue cooking it to ruin it, once it's fully cooked, then you chayiv for bishul of basa b'chal. Okay, back to now. This is all a diversion from this gufa of this shita of Rav's that we had said that chatzizai is basar, chatzizai is chol. But now we're getting back to our original contention that Rav holds efshel l'soichatoi, which, like we said, is equivalent to chaticha nas and avela. Rav says it's also. This statement that efshel l'soichatoi is also that Rav had said it's really a machlokes tanoim. The Tanya. Tibas cholof shenafla al hachatichas. If you have, this is really pretty much the same statement that Rav had originally made. You have a drop of milk that fell on a slice of meat that was sticking out of a stew. So when you drop milk on it, it only goes into that chaticha originally. Since it gave a tam to the chaticha, it becomes an avela. Yehuda says, and this is almost exactly what Rav had said, that the chaticha becomes an avela. It becomes asur, not just the tam of the chalav that goes into the rest of the meat, asers it, but the chaticha itself becomes the chaticha of avela. And that chaticha, even though the drop of milk is only enough to give a tam into that slice, but it's not enough to give a tam into the whole pot. But since that slice, that chaticha became asur, and that chaticha is min b'minai of the rest of the slices. So even if there's 100 times as much stew as there is of this chaticha, it will still be asur. That became a chaticha of nevela, a chaticha of basar, which is the minai of the rest of the stew. Zot Gemara. Chum disagree. They say until, in order for it to be asur, it has to be until that milk gives a tam into everything, not just into that chaticha, but it's enough to give a tam into the milk, into the soup, the liquid, and to the little pieces and the chatichas and the large pieces that make up the entire stew. So tomorrow, Zok Gemara, Amar Rebbe, and about this machlokes that we said between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chacham, Rebbe said, Niro and Div Rabbi Yehuda b'shaloi nir b'shaloi kisa. L'chayr Rabbi Yehuda, who said chaticha nas nevela, and the whole thing becomes asur because of that one chaticha. That's where he didn't mix the pot, which we'll see has a couple of it causes the flavor to be distributed. B'shaloi kisa, and he didn't cover the pot, which is similar to near to stirring it. If you cover the pot, it causes it to boil and bubble, and causes again what's in it to be mixed. And the Chacham who say it's only going to be asur if there's sufficient of isser to asur everything, that's talking about only they're correct in a case where it was mixed. So first thing, one is going to analyze what did we say that this is Rebbe is commenting on this machlokes tanoim, and he's saying that Rabbi Yehuda is right b'shaloi nir, and the Chama are right b'shanir. Rabbi Yehuda is correct when it didn't get mixed, which is strange, right? You think the other way around. B'shaloi nir, that causes it to be mixed, that's more reason that the chalav got mixed into everything else. And the Chacham are right when it mixed. So the Gemara asks, my loy nir v'loy kisa. What does it mean when we say it wasn't mixed? That Rabbi Yehuda is correct when it wasn't mixed. If you say there was no, again, nir and kisa are both different ways of mixing the liquids. If we're talking about whether it was never mixed, mivla bala, mivla palat. If it never mixed, the Gemara understands that there's no such thing as when you have a piece of meat sticking out of the stew and milk goes in it. If there's no mixing, then it never leaves that piece. No, the tam of the meat doesn't leave, the tam of the chalav, everything stays the way it is. The tam just goes into that piece of meat, and that's the end of it. So how could you be chayiv if it never was mixed? The ella loy nir betchila ella b'seif. We're talking about where he put the drop of milk. At that point, nothing was mixed. After some period of time, when it was absorbed into that one piece of meat, then he mixed everything. And then, according to Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi will say he's correct. So when we say loy near, it means it wasn't mixed originally, but eventually it was mixed. So then Rabbi Yehuda is correct that it's going to say chaticha nas nevela, and it's going to answer the whole thing because of min b'mina. So Gemara amai habala v'hapalat. But why should it be usher when absorb the taste of milk into that piece of meat? But then you mixed it, and then the tam of the milk left that piece of meat and went out into the rest, and it's not enough anymore to be nice and tam in this piece of meat. It's l'chayra, it's l'seichatai. It's as if it's bala. The tam of the milk has left that piece. So how could you say that it's chaticha nas nevela and it's answering everything else? So it must be that Rebbe understands, that Rabbi Yehuda holds, that Efshel L'Seichtoi is a Chaticha Nas Nevela. So this is our raya that we said it's a Machlokes Tanoim of Efshel L'Seichtoi is Aser. We see Rabbi Yehuda is holding Efshel L'Seichtoi is Aser, because otherwise, in this case where it was originally not mixed and then later was mixed, when it gets mixed, if you hold Efshel L'Seichtoi is mutter, so the tam of the milk has left that slice, so it's no longer able to say Chaticha Nas Nevel to Aser. Must be that Rebbe understands Rabbi Yehuda to be saying Efshel L'Seichtoi Aser. Correct the Gemara, but if that's the case, we're saying Rebbe says like Rabbi Yehuda, where it was originally not mixed, and then it was mixed. Saying I only hold like Rabbi Yehuda in that case. But from the fact that Rebbe is saying I only hold Rabbi Yehuda in that case, Rabbi Yehuda savar kiniyah mitchil vatzaif, but kizah mitchil vatzaif also. But clearly, if he's saying I hold like Rabbi Yehuda in this case, meaning that means Rabbi Yehuda said it not only in that case, he said it even in the case where it was mixed from the beginning. Correcting more on that. But if it was mixed from the beginning, if as soon as you put the milk onto that piece of meat, it was immediately mixed. Amai halibala klal. If that single piece of meat never absorbed the milk, it was immediately mixed into the whole thing. It never had a time that it was just on that piece of meat. So this milk is not enough to be nice and tam in the whole thing. The only reason it was also is because it was nice and tam into the original piece of meat, and then that piece of meat was nas and avela, and it distributed to everything else. I think there's a good time. I think I've told this over to you before. To say over what my friend said when he became a Rav. And I think I told this to you before. He said, what do you do? He hadn't really had a chance to learn Basa B'chalav. He said, what do you do if someone asks you if a milchuk, a spoon, falls into a fleshika pot, chicken soup? So he said, you tell the guy, he was told by an experienced Rav, you tell the person who asked, if a milchuk, a spoon falls into a milchuk pot, that's not a problem. If a fleshika pot falls into a fleshika spoon falls into a fleshika pot, that's also not a problem. If you have a milchuk spoon in a fleshika pot, that's a good question. That I'm going to have to look into. So you can see why you have to look into it. It's not so simple, these halachas. But in any case, back to our question. If this is the case, how could Rabbi Yehuda taka hold if you were near the pot, the piece of meat that had the milk on it immediately? So why don't you just say that this milk was distributed in all the meat, in the whole stew, and it's not enough to be nice and top? Halibala klal. So Gemara Eimeloi Nia Yafa Yafa B'lei Kisa Yafa Yafa. The Gemara says that Yehuda holds it's aser in a chanami be'emes, it's not enough to aser. But Rabbi Yehuda is chayshish that maybe a person won't mix it so well, it will have enough of a chance to be bala into that original piece of meat before it was quickly transferred everywhere else. And once it's a chaticha nasavela, it would aser everything else. Amar Ma. Now we move on to the Chacham. The Divrei Chacham Ksheniya V'chisa. We said that Rebbe had said that he agrees with the Chachamim that say it has to be enough to be nice and tam in the whole thing. V'sheniya V'kisa, when it was mixed. My nir or my kisa. What does that mean? Ilem and nir b'sayf or nir b'tchila v'kisa b'sayf v'si b'tchila ohar and nir on Divrei Rebbe Yehuda. Baha. We're talking about the same case that Rabbi Yehuda had said that it's asur, and the Chum is saying that no, it's only asur if it's nice and tam in the whole thing. We already said that Rabbi holds like Rabbi Yehuda in that case. How can he can also hold like the Chachamim? Ella near metchila v'atzayf, v'chisa metchila v'atzayf. We're talking about where it was mixed all the way at the beginning. And on that, the Chacham are saying it's not going to be asur. They don't agree with Rabbi Yehuda's chshash that maybe they won't mix it so quickly and it will first get nivla into a single thing. They're not quite sure. Talking about chal Rabban Sabri near b'sayfel and near b'tchila kisa b'sayfel kisa b'tchila mutter. You see that they would disagree with the case of Rabbi Yehuda. That means the Rabbanan are saying, we're saying Nira and Divrei Rabbanan. In the case of where it was Nia Betchila, Vices, the Rabbanan said they didn't, that it's mutter unless there was a nice and tam in the whole thing. They said it not just in that case, they also said it in the case of where Rabbi Yehuda, where we said like Rabbi Yehuda, where it was Nia Betchila, B'chisa B'sayf, that they'll say, even so it's going to be mutter. So you see, now we're finally filling in the second part of our contention, that we said this is a machlekes tanoim, the machlekes that this which Rav and Levi had argued about whether Efshel Seichtei is also or not. This is going to also be the machlekes between the Rabbi Yehuda and the Chacham. Amalei Rav Achami Difti Ravina. Rav Achami says no, not so fast, not necessarily the case. How do you know that they're disagreeing about this din of Efshel Seichtei and whether maybe everyone agrees, meaning even the Chachamim who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda and say that where it was chisa, where it was near at the end and not at the beginning, it's mutter. They hold it chaticha nasel ve'ezas. But the reason why it's mutter, the reason why it's mutter is not because of the Eshel Teichai piece. There were two parts of Rav's contention. One was because of Eshel Seich, and one was because of Min B'minai, that the basar, the time of the basar becomes, that piece of basar is enough to passel everything else. So maybe that's the part that the Chacham disagree with. But we don't know that they hold that Eshel Seich is mutter. Maybe it would be asur, but just over here, it's not asur. It's not going to be enough to asur everything else. Rabbanul Tamai, Tamim Min B'minai Batul. And the Rabban are going, Rabbi Yehuda Tamei Dama Min B'minai Lebat. Rabban Tamei Dama Min B'minai Bat. We had a machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim about Min B'minai Batul also. So maybe that's what the source of this machlokes is. So tomorrow, Hi Ma. Iyam Rabbi Shlomo the Rabban Min B'minai Hacha Rabbi Yehuda Sfira Lahu. If we would say this, the Gemara rejects that. No, if they would say that they agree with Rabbi Yehuda that Min B'minai is Bapa, but Efshel Seichtei Kligi, and the reason why they disagree, and they say that when it's at the beginning it wasn't mixed, and it was later mixed. The reason why it's still not going to be possible, it's not going to be asur, is unless it was a nice and tam in the whole right of Haida Kamer Rabbi Niran Div Rabbi Yehuda Baha. Then you can understand why Rabbi had said that we're holding like Rabbi Yehuda in his case, where it was only mixed at the end, and like the Chachamim in the case where it's mixed even at the beginning. If you say that everyone holds Chaticha Nasav, the Gemara says that if it's a very complicated chesed, but essentially what happens is then that Rabbi Yehuda, it's just a machlokes in the dvarim of Rabbi Yehuda. That means the Chachamim are not. You should. The way Rashi explains it is, you should say that the Rabbi Yehuda himself is correct. In the case where there was no, because everyone's agreeing to Rabbi Yehuda's svara. If we're saying that that the machlokes is b'min b'minai, that everyone agrees Efshel L'Soichtei is also, so then you must be holding that whatever you must be agreeing to Rabbi Yehuda's svara that we said that he says that when it was mixed from the beginning was still chayshish, that maybe a person won't mix it well enough and it will first have gone into this thing. So if that's the case, the question is not the Nirayan Divrei Rabbi Yehuda connected the words of the Chacham. It should be in Rabbi Yehuda himself that when he did it, we agree with Rabbi Yehuda that Efshel by Mimba Minai, since he holds by Mimba Minai, we're going to agree with him. Which means, according to the Chachamim, according to the Shita, they're going to hold that it's going to be potter whether he mixed it at the beginning or not. So obviously they're worried about what Rabbi Yehuda was worried about, that maybe he's not going to pass, that he's not going to stir it sufficiently, and it's going to first get into that first. Just give me a second, because I want to say this correctly, because it's also being mechalik according to this, whether we're talking about when the Chachamim say that they hold Efshel L'Soichtei is mutter, it's because it never became asur. But when they say if it's nice and tam in the whole thing, then it's in everything else. Yeah, then that makes sense. That would be if you hold that the arguing on Efshel L'Soichtei. But if you say that it's Efshel, if the machlokes is in b'min minai, so that's in any case that's the bottom line. The bottom line is that if the discussion, the chiluk between was by min b'minai, then it's incorrect to say Niran Divrei Rabbi Yehuda and not and as opposed to and Niran Divrei Chachamim. You should just say Niran Divrei Rabbi Yehuda in this and not Niran Divrei Rabbi Yehuda in the case where it was not mixed from the beginning. Where it was mixed from the beginning. What time is it? 10:07. What time did we start? Do we have another few minutes? I would like to start the next mission, if that's okay. If anyone has to drop off, gesund to hate. Zak the mission. Hakchal. You know what? What time is it? What time did we start? I don't even remember.
25.
25. Okay, so it's already 40 minutes. Okay, we'll stop over here. Sorry.